Welcome to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. This week, Neil Bisson, a retired CSIS intelligence officer and director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network, returns to the microphone to break down a series of developments that highlight how foreign interference, sabotage, cyber espionage, and geopolitical competition continue to reshape Canada's security environment and the broader global landscape. We start off in Canada, where the federal government asks the courts to withhold sensitive national security information in the upcoming Nijjar murder trial, exposing the ongoing tension between intelligence protection and criminal prosecution in cases tied to foreign states. Also in Canada, senior officials publicly downplay allegations of active Indian foreign interference ahead of Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit, raising important questions about how economic priorities intersect with national security messaging. In Europe, Western intelligence officials warn that Russia may be positioning itself for future sabotage through covert property acquisitions near military bases and critical infrastructure, while a separate investigation reveals how Moscow is increasingly relying on criminal intermediaries to carry out its shadow war across the continent. Turning to China, Google disrupts a major cyber espionage campaign linked to the state-backed hacking group known as Gallium, targeting governments and telecommunications networks worldwide. And we examine how China is intensifying prosecutions over technology leaks at home, offering a revealing look at what Beijing fears losing and what that signals about global intelligence competition. And finally, back in Canada, the federal government acknowledges it has no authority to conduct a national security review into BC Ferries' contract with a Chinese shipbuilder, exposing structural gaps in Canada's security oversight framework. Taken together, these stories reveal a consistent theme. Today's threats operate below the threshold of open conflict, exploiting legal seams, economic pressure points, and technological vulnerabilities. Are you ready? Then let's go.
Hello, welcome back to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Neil Bisson, a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. I've been away from the microphone for a few weeks, and I'm excited to be back to discuss the international stories and news articles concerning national security, espionage, sabotage, foreign interference, and terrorism. As always, I take the headlines concerning these issues and provide you with the analysis, insight, and intelligence you need to understand how your career, your country, and your safety are all affected by the shadowy world of intelligence. It's been a busy week. From Canada downplaying the foreign interference against the Sikh community by the Indian government to China's latest hacking attempts being discovered by Google. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started. We start in Canada for our first few segments this week, where the Canadian government asked a federal court judge for permission to withhold certain information from the upcoming murder trial of 4 men accused in the killing of Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia in June of 2023. According to the Department of Justice, the information in question is considered sensitive national security material, and its disclosure could harm Canada's international relations and security interests. At the center of the case is the government's use of Section 38 of the Canada Evidence Act, which allows Ottawa to prevent the disclosure of classified or sensitive information in court proceedings. From an intelligence perspective, this is not unusual. When a criminal case intersects with national security intelligence reporting, especially when the intelligence may involve foreign partners, covert collection methods, or human sources. The challenge is that intelligence is not collected with the courtroom in mind. It is collected to identify threats, assess intent, and inform government decision-making to prevent national security threat actors from conducting operations or attacks against Canada. When intelligence becomes part of the criminal process, governments are often forced to choose between protecting sources and methods or risking the integrity of the prosecution. This can be further complicated when intelligence information is shared from a foreign government, which typically places caveats on the information, restricting it from being used in any court proceedings. The Nijjar murder is not just a criminal case, it is deeply entangled with allegations of foreign interference and transnational repression. Canadian officials previously stated that there was credible intelligence pointing to possible involvement by a foreign state, India, triggering a major diplomatic dispute between Canada and India. That context matters, because intelligence tied to foreign state activity is often among the most sensitive material that government holds. Similar challenges have emerged in other cases involving terrorism, espionage, and foreign interference, where intelligence assessments cannot always be converted into evidence that meets the criminal court standards without exposing how that intelligence was obtained. As I previously stated, intelligence investigations are held to a level of suspected activity, where evidentiary or criminal investigations are held to a level of belief. In the eyes of the court, these are very different levels. From my experience in intelligence and law enforcement, this is where the system strains. Law enforcement requires evidence that can be tested in court, while intelligence services must protect long-term capabilities. Once sensitive information is disclosed, it can't be taken back. Sources dry up, methods are compromised, and international partners become more cautious about sharing information in the future. At the same time, defense attorneys can challenge the fact that information provided to the court is not available for cross-examination and therefore should not be permitted or used in the trial. This is another example of how foreign states can use proxies, claim plausible deniability, and continue to participate in extrajudicial murders of Canadian citizens on Canadian soil without repercussions. This equates to cases like the Nijjar murder, continuing to expose the limits of Canada's legal and intelligence frameworks. How this trial unfolds may shape future decisions about how intelligence is handled in criminal courts, particularly in cases involving foreign interference and political violence. Unfortunately, as we see in the next segment, it appears that Canada's appetite to seek justice for victims of foreign interference and transnational repression may be taking a back seat to any perceived economic gains with India. Sticking with foreign interference in Canada, in the lead up to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's high-profile visit to India, senior Canadian government officials have publicly downplayed earlier allegations that the Indian government was actively involved in foreign interference activities on Canadian soil, underscoring a strategic shift in Ottawa's messaging as it seeks to reset bilateral ties. Officials told Canadian media that while security concerns remain a focus of ongoing dialogue with India, Ottawa no longer characterizes the relationship as defined by active interference by the Indian state. Senior sources emphasize that discussions with New Delhi are, quote, mature, and that safeguards are in place to prevent undue foreign influence, framing the relationship in terms of diplomatic engagement rather than confrontation. One official noted that if Canada generally believed ongoing interference was occurring, Prime Minister Carney's visit would not be taking place. This is, of course, absurd. As most Canadians are clearly aware, Canada's economic future and sustainability are the highest priority for the Canadian government, given the insecurities resulting from the continuously changing tariffs from the United States against Canada. This softened public posture marks a significant divergence from previous comments linked to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service's 2023 assertions that the Indian government was involved with agents in violent activities and transnational repression tied to the Khalistan separatist movement. Most notably, the killing of the Canadian citizen Hardeep Singh Nijjar, which triggered a diplomatic rupture between Ottawa and New Delhi. The Canada-India foreign interference debate stems from a broader diplomatic dispute that escalated after the FBI and CSIS alleged links between Indian authorities and the Nijjar killing, which New Delhi rejected outright. All this despite a foiled assassination attempt against a Canadian-American Sikh Khalistani activist, Gurpatwat Singh Panoon, just weeks after the assassination of Nijjar. The resulting diplomatic exchange included expulsions of diplomats from both capitals and a period of stalled bilateral relations. Since then, efforts by successive Canadian governments, including diplomatic visits and resumed engagement, have sought to chart a pragmatic path forward without abandoning security concerns, even as critics argue that downplaying interference risk undermines accountability. Observers see the shift in rhetoric as part of a calculated strategy by Ottawa to balance national security imperatives with economic and geopolitical priorities. Canada's pursuit of deeper trade and investment ties with India, particularly as Ottawa seeks to diversify its economic relationships in the Indo-Pacific region, has elevated the importance of maintaining stable diplomatic footing. At the same time, security analysts caution that altering public messaging on foreign interference allegations does not erase unresolved intelligence concerns and may complicate efforts to enforce accountability or protect diaspora communities vulnerable to transnational coercion. The Canadian government's decision to publicly moderate its language on Indian interference reflects a broader recalibration of foreign policy priorities ahead of Prime Minister Carney's visit. The Hindu-centric Indian government has demonstrated their visceral disdain regarding failed operations in Western countries, where they seek to silence individuals advocating for a separate territory of Khalistan. While signals of restored cooperation may advance economic and strategic objectives, they cannot come at the cost of sustained scrutiny of foreign influence and diasporic security issues that remain salient to the safety of Canada and Canadians. This is a concerning trend, as the PM's last visit to China resulted in an agreement to import 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles, another national security concern identified by the current government last year, but again, sadly not adhered to during the trade talks. For our next segment, we head to Europe, where we're looking at a deeply concerning report that highlights how Russia may be positioning itself for future sabotage and covert action well beyond the battlefield in Ukraine. According to an investigation by The Telegraph, Western intelligence officials are warning that Russian intelligence services have quietly acquired properties across Europe near military bases and critical infrastructure, what they describe as Trojan horse sites designed for surveillance, sabotage, and potential attacks in future crises. The article outlines intelligence assessments suggesting that Russian state-linked actors have purchased a wide range of properties including summer homes, warehouses, holiday cabins, apartments, and even entire islands in at least a dozen European countries. These properties are allegedly located near military installations, ports, undersea cable landing points, and other sensitive civilian infrastructure. Intelligence officials cited in the article warn that some of these sites may already contain drones, weapons, explosives, or pre-positioned operatives ready to be activated if tensions escalate. Rather than relying on conventional military force, the concern is that Russia could use these locations to conduct deniable acts of sabotage designed to disrupt transportation, energy networks, communications, and public confidence. From an intelligence perspective, this reflects a classic gray zone strategy, operating below the threshold of open conflict to avoid triggering a justifiable military response while still imposing real costs on adversaries. This tactic is not without precedent. The article points to a well-documented Finnish case involving Ariston Helmi, where Russian-owned properties in the Turku archipelago, located near key maritime routes and military infrastructure, were raided by Finnish authorities in 2018. While the owner was ultimately charged with financial crimes rather than espionage, the scale and location of the properties alarmed intelligence officials and reshaped how Finland viewed real estate as a national security vulnerability. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, European governments have also linked Moscow to a surge of sabotage-related activity, including arson attacks, attempted derailments, parcel bombs, and surveillance operations, raising fears that these incidents may have been a test run rather than isolated acts. The article includes warnings from serving and former European intelligence officers who argue that sabotage operations are more likely to divide political consensus than a traditional military attack. As one official noted, plausible deniability makes attribution harder, slowing decision-making and complicating any move toward invoking NATO's Article 5. The piece also references comments from the new head of MI6, Blaise Metrelli, who has warned that Britain is now operating in a space between peace and war, with Russia actively testing Western resolve through tactics designed to stay just below the threshold of armed conflict.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you're a podcast host or someone wanting to be interviewed on podcasts as a guest, visit podmatch.com. Podmatch automatically connects ideal podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. We always say it works just like a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. Podmatch has connected over 85,000 guests and hosts together for interviews that listeners love, all while saving you countless hours of administrative work through built-in automations. If you're ready to level up your podcast interviews on either side of the mic, start today by visiting podmatch.com.
Security analysts cited in the article argue that what once appeared to be suspicious commercial activity has now evolved into a recognized vector of hybrid warfare. Taken together, this reporting highlights a growing concern within European intelligence communities that real estate ownership itself has become a tool of statecraft and covert preparation. This article highlights how foreign adversaries target vulnerable sectors of society. Real estate sale and purchase in Canada is not seen as a national security concern, but just like what's happening in Europe, it can be. Foreign state adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, and others could easily purchase real estate close to sensitive sites for surveillance or possible sabotage operations. If you work in the real estate business and you have concerns regarding the acquisition of housing in sensitive areas like government buildings, critical infrastructure including electricity and water treatment plants, or a military installation, please contact law enforcement or Canadian Security Intelligence Service to share your concerns. This is exactly what foreign states fear, that the population of the countries they target become aware of their activities and are willing to do something about it. This is a warning call to all Western nations, not just European ones. Whether the allegations prove accurate or not, the broader trend is clear. Russia is increasingly comfortable using ambiguity, deniability, and civilian cover to position itself for disruption and coercion. As European states move unevenly toward tightening property ownership laws, intelligence officials warn that fragmented legal frameworks and limited cross-border intelligence sharing leave persistent vulnerabilities that adversaries are well aware of and willing to exploit. Staying on the topic of Russian intelligence operations, our next segment provides a rare and revealing look inside Russia's evolving sabotage campaign across Europe, and how Moscow is increasingly relying on criminal intermediaries rather than traditional intelligence professionals. According to an in-depth investigation by the New York Times, Western security officials believe a former taxi driver from rural Russia has become a central figure in coordinating acts of arson, sabotage, and attempted infrastructure attacks on behalf of the Russian intelligence services. The article focuses on Alexei Vladimirovich Kolosovsky, a 42-year-old former taxi driver with connections to organized crime networks involving hacking, document fraud, and vehicle theft. Western officials allege that Kolosovsky has acted as a key facilitator in Russia's shadow war against European countries supporting Ukraine. According to court documents and intelligence assessments cited in the article, Kolosovsky helped to oversee or coordinate a series of operations across Poland, Lithuania, Germany, Britain, and possibly other countries. These operations allegedly include arson attacks on commercial sites, plans to place incendiary devices on cargo aircraft, and sabotage efforts aimed at logistics hubs critical European economies. What makes this seem significant is that Kolosovsky is not described as a trained intelligence officer. Instead, he appears to operate as a criminal intermediary, a logistics manager and recruiter who bridges the gap between Russian intelligence planners and disposable operatives on the ground. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, European governments have expelled hundreds of Russian diplomats suspected of intelligence activity. That pressure has forced Moscow to adapt, and rather than relying on intelligence officers under diplomatic cover, Russian intelligence services appear to be outsourcing sabotage to criminal networks and non-traditional actors who can travel more freely, attract less attention, and offer plausible deniability. The article situates Kolosovsky within this broader shift, one where intelligence services leverage criminal ecosystems to conduct hostile acts below the threshold of armed conflict. These operations are designed to disrupt economies, intimidate populations, and strain political cohesion without triggering a clear military response. This approach aligns with what intelligence officials describe as Russia's gray zone strategy, using deniable, low-cost action to impose cumulative pressure on adversaries. Western security officials interviewed for the article described the sabotage campaign as both escalating and experimental. Incidents such as arson attacks outside Warsaw that destroyed hundreds of businesses, fires targeting commercial sites in the Baltic states, and attempted attacks on freight and logistics networks are viewed as test cases, probing how far Russia can go without provoking decisive retaliation. Investigators also warned that criminal facilitators like Kolosovsky provide Moscow with insulation. If operatives are arrested, Russia can deny involvement, claim the acts were criminal in nature, or dismiss them as isolated incidents, even when patterns strongly suggest coordination. For Western intelligence services, this case highlights a critical challenge: attribution. When sabotage is carried out by criminals rather than uniformed soldiers or accredited intelligence officers, proving state direction becomes far more complex. It also raises concerns about recruitment pathways. Officials believe some individuals involved in these plots may not have fully understood the strategic purpose of their actions, underscoring how financial vulnerability, coercion, or manipulation can be exploited to conduct hostile operations at scale. This model lowers the cost of entry for sabotage and increases the difficulty of deterrence, a troubling development for countries already stretched by cyber threats, disinformation, and economic warfare. The New York Times investigation underscores how Russia's intelligence services are adapting to a more hostile operating environment by blurring the line between espionage and organized crime. The use of intermediaries like Alexei Kolosovsky reflect a deliberate strategy to maintain pressure on Europe while minimizing political risk and attribution. As Western governments grapple with this evolving threat, the challenge will be identifying, disrupting, and deterring networks that operate in the shadows, long before their actions escalate from arson and disruption to something far more dangerous. We move on from Russian sabotage to Chinese state-sponsored hacking for our next segment. This week, Google says it disrupted a large-scale cyber espionage operation linked to a Chinese state-backed hacking group that targeted dozens of organizations around the world. The operation, which had been running for years, focused heavily on government and telecommunication networks and highlights how state-sponsored cyber actors continue to exploit trusted digital infrastructure to conduct intelligence collection. According to Google's threat intelligence group, the hacking campaign was attributed to a group commonly known as Gallium, tracked internally as UNC2814. The group compromised at least 53 organizations across 42 countries using legitimate cloud-based tools to conceal command and control activity and evade detection. By abusing services such as Google Sheets, the attackers were able to blend malicious activity into normal enterprise traffic, making it significantly harder for defenders to spot. Google says the operation resulted in the theft of sensitive data, including personal identifiers, and in some cases involved the deployment of backdoor malware to maintain persistent access. As part of its response, Google dismantled the group's cloud infrastructure, disabled accounts, and cut off domains used to support the campaign. Gallium has been linked to previous Chinese cyber espionage campaigns that focus on long-term access rather than immediate disruption. This approach reflects a broader pattern of Chinese intelligence operations, where cyber intrusions are treated as strategic intelligence gathering tools rather than short-term attacks. Telecommunication networks in particular remain a high-value target due to the access they provide to communications data, metadata, and broader government systems. The recent decision by the Government of Canada to allow for the importation of 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles gives me pause when I think about how accessible telecommunications will be to these vehicles. For anyone and everyone who has a cell phone connected to the vehicle, their telecommunications network, and cell towers. State-sponsored hacking groups like Gallium will find yet another threat vector to exploit. While Chinese officials rejected the allegations and accused Western governments of politicizing cybersecurity issues, Google stressed that this campaign was distinct from other known Chinese-linked operations. From an intelligence standpoint, the techniques used in this case, patience, infrastructure reuse, and reliance on legitimate platforms, are consistent with state-directed espionage rather than criminal hacking. This disruption underscores a persistent reality in global cyber espionage. Dismantling infrastructure does not end the threat. Groups like Gallium are part of a long-term intelligence program that adapts quickly and can reconstitute under new technical identifiers. For governments and critical infrastructure operators, this case is another reminder that cyber espionage remains a core feature of strategic competition and a continuing national security challenge. In a somewhat related story, our next segment takes us inside how China itself is publicly framing their perceived threats of espionage and why that matters for Western intelligence services. An article published by the Global Times, citing China's Supreme People's Procuratorate, outlines an intensified crackdown on technology leaks and espionage across key strategic sectors, including artificial intelligence, semiconductors, biomanufacturing, new materials, and energy technologies. While this is Chinese state media, the value of the article is not in taking it at face value, but in what it reveals about Beijing's priorities, vulnerabilities, and fears. According to Chinese authorities, prosecutions are increasing against individuals accused of leaking trade secrets or transferring sensitive technologies to foreign entities. The article emphasizes risks tied to employees leaving domestic firms to work for international companies, as well as growing concerns over illicit technology transfers in cutting-edge sectors. From an intelligence perspective, this is an important signal. States rarely draw attention to weaknesses unless they believe the threat is real. China is effectively telling us which technologies it views as strategically critical and which it believes are under sustained foreign collection pressure. This is less about internal law enforcement and more about national security, economic competitiveness, and regime stability. China has long fused economic development with national security. Technology dominance is central to that strategy, particularly in areas that support military modernization, surveillance, industrial automation, and long-term economic leverage. What's notable here is the public nature of the warning. Beijing is acknowledging that it fears loss of intellectual property not just through cyber means, but through people. Talent mobility, corporate recruitment, academic exchange, and commercial partnerships. Historically, when China tightens controls and increases prosecutions in specific sectors, it often reflects both defensive concerns and offensive intent. While the Global Times article reflects official Chinese messaging, intelligence analysts generally treat such disclosures as indicators. If Beijing is prosecuting aggressively in AI, chips, and advanced manufacturing, it suggests those same sectors are viewed as decisive for future power, and therefore worth protecting at all costs. It also highlights the tension China faces, needing international engagement to advance technology while fearing that openness exposes it to exploitation. For Western intelligence services and agencies, this story offers two key insights. First, it provides a roadmap of what China is worried about losing, which also points to what China is likely trying to acquire elsewhere. When we overlay China's concern list with Canada's own publicly stated research and development priorities, including artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, biomanufacturing, clean technology, critical minerals, and defense-adjacent innovation, a clear pattern emerges. These overlapping priority sectors can be identified with a reasonable degree of confidence as potential targets for Chinese espionage, technological acquisition, and talent-focused collection efforts in Canada and allied countries. Second, it reinforces the need for strong counterintelligence protections. If China is tightening internal controls, that increases risk for sources, researchers, and intermediaries caught between systems. It also suggests that Western governments, universities, and private sector partners must better understand how national innovation priorities intersect with foreign intelligence interests. This story isn't about accepting Chinese claims at face value, it's about reading between the lines. What China publicly worries about tells us a great deal about where strategic competition is intensifying. For Canada and its allies, the lesson is clear. Innovation policy is national security policy. The same technologies that are being prioritized for growth and resilience are those most likely to attract sustained foreign intelligence attention. Understanding that reality and acting on it is essential to protecting intellectual property, safeguarding talent, and staying ahead of an increasingly contested technological landscape. For our final segment this week, we end off where we started, in Canada. Canada's Public Safety Minister has stated that the federal government has no authority to conduct a national security review into BC Ferry's decision to contract with a foreign shipbuilder for its new vessels. The comment underlines a significant gap in federal powers under security assessments in provincial and privately governed procurement decisions, even on projects with clear national infrastructure implications. According to officials, because BC Ferries is structured as an independent company, albeit one with strong ties and reliance on federal financing, Ottawa cannot unilaterally impose a national security review on the contract to build 4 new major vessels overseas. The decision, which saw China Merchants Industry Weihai Shipyard selected to build the ferries, has drawn criticism from multiple political actors, but federal departments maintain that they lack legal jurisdiction to enforce a security assessment tied to foreign procurement. The lack of formal authority means that federal departments such as Public Safety Canada must request cooperation from the province or BC Ferries itself if they want to access documentation or the ability to influence security outcomes. This leaves Ottawa relegated to diplomatic leverage and intergovernmental persuasion rather than any binding review power. BC Ferries' contract with the Chinese shipyard has already been a source of controversy, partly because no Canadian shipbuilders had bid on the work, and partly due to broader geopolitical concerns about foreign involvement in critical coastal infrastructure. While federal officials have expressed, quote, displeasure, unquote, and concern, the company's corporate independence under British Columbia's governing framework limits Ottawa's formal oversight options on procurement decisions. The situation highlights a structural gap in Canada's national security architecture. There is no clear statutory mechanism empowering the federal government to conduct a security review on infrastructure decisions made by entities that, although publicly supported, operate outside direct federal control. Critics say the federal government's inability to conduct a security review exposes broader vulnerabilities in Canada's framework for protecting critical infrastructure. In an era where geopolitical competition, particularly with the People's Republic of China, shapes economic and industrial decision-making, the lack of binding review power for federally financed or related projects raises questions about how national security risks are identified and mitigated. Supporters of provincial autonomy argue that BC Ferries' corporate status and governance structure rightly protect it from federal overreach, but opponents counter that the scale and strategic importance of the ferry system elevate the need for standardized security review process. The Public Safety Minister's statement confirms that Canada's current legal framework does not grant the federal government authority to mandate national security reviews on infrastructure decisions made by provincial or independently governed entities, even when such projects involve foreign entities and federal financing. This gap underscores ongoing debates about the balance between provincial autonomy, corporate independence, and national security imperatives. Well, that's it for this week. As always, the links to the news articles for the segments are in the transcript. I want to thank the participants of my most recent online course being offered at the University of Ottawa and the Professional Development Institute. The course, Sabotage and Proxy Operations in Modern Intelligence, discusses many of the same issues that we've heard here today. The participants of that course are now better aware of and able to identify the patterns of proxy and sabotage operations as Canada remains a target of these operations by adversarial and allied countries. So until next week, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
That wraps up this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. Thanks for listening. From courtroom battles over classified intelligence in Canada, to shifting diplomatic language around foreign interference, to Russia's expanding sabotage networks and China's persistent cyber espionage campaigns, this week's stories underscore one undeniable truth. Strategic competition is accelerating, and it is unfolding in ways that are subtle, adaptive, and often deliberately ambiguous. These are not isolated events. They are interconnected pressure points in a broader contest involving economic leverage, technological dominance, political influence, and covert action. Producing the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up requires continuous monitoring of global reporting, intelligence assessments, and emerging security trends to provide clear, fact-based analysis each week. If you find value in this work, you're encouraged to support the podcast by visiting Buzzsprout, where you can make a one-time or ongoing contribution. Your support helps sustain independent analysis and ensures this program continues without interruption. Don't forget to subscribe, share the episode, and leave a review. It helps more listeners discover the show. And as Neil always reminds us, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.